We will attempt to answer all the questions that you type in to our guest speakers and Rabbi, time permitting. This program will be recorded and will be available for viewing sometime tomorrow from our website on ladorvador.org. Welcome and shalom to this very important and special program for Yom HaShoah. We would like to dedicate tonight's program in honor of our friend, Horace Hecht, a beloved member of Dor Va-Dor and Holocaust survivor, who recently passed on March 26th. We will keep his memory alive at Dor Va-Dor. We honor and remember all those lost and affected by the Holocaust, and we are committed to remembering them and keeping all of their memories alive for generations to come, Dor Va-Dor. Tonight we will have two wonderful guest speakers, Helen Daniel and Ralph Mollerick, both Holocaust survivors, that I'm so pleased to have them with us tonight. And we will have our very own Rabbi Barry Silver, who will be speaking as well. We thank you so much for participating in tonight's program. And without any further ado, we're going to show you a video.
אבינו מלכנו שמע קולנו, אבינו מלכנו חטאנו לפניך, אבינו מלכנו חמול עלינו ועלול עלינו ותאפנו.
As I was mentioning,
Starting
hello
with-
everyone. We're gathered here in order to commemorate Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust, and also we have two wonderful people who are here who are going to share a little bit of their story with us. You know, right now we do this at a time when this world is undergoing the disruption and the chaos of the coronavirus. And people are reeling from how devastating this virus is upon the world. 2.5 million people that we know have infected, 167,000 people have died, and the entire world has been turned upside down trying to deal with this tragedy. And as sad as this is, we recall that the Holocaust was something of a scale far beyond anything that we could even imagine. 167,000 deaths are probably a statistical error in calculating just the number of Jewish people that were intentionally killed. But 6 million is not the number of people, even within the Jewish people, 50 million dead, but 6 million is not the number of Jewish people that suffered in the Holocaust. For those are the number of people who tragically died. There were so many more who underwent that horrific experience, and then their families and future generations and others who are affected. The amount of people affected is far more than that. Each one of them has a story. In order to try to understand the Holocaust, and we can never grasp the dimensions of it, we have to hear from the individuals to understand that each one of those people had a story. We're going to hear from two such people today who not only survived the Holocaust, but this is called Yom HaShoah Hagivurah, and heroism, who had the heroism and the courage to come out of it with their well-being and equanimity still intact and able to tell the story, to share with other people, to try to hope that such tragedies won't occur in the future. And so tonight we will hear two of those stories. The first person that I'm going to introduce, I'm so thrilled that she was able to be with us and volunteer to share a little bit of what she went through with us, is Helen Daniel.
Good evening. Good evening, Rabbi. I'm Helen
Good
Daniel,
evening.
and we are all together in this isolation that we're living right now due to the virus that we are experiencing. I had a rehearsal to this about 81 years ago when I was 13 years old. I was in isolation due to the fact that I was hiding from the Nazis. And this happened the day after Kristallnacht, November 1938. And they were looking for my father, who was in hiding. They were putting all Jewish men into a concentration camp. And the reason they couldn't find him is because he was a fugitive. And I explained that to you at the last meeting a year ago, why he was a fugitive, and I'll be very brief. I'm not going into details. His cousin owned a glass factory in Cologne, Germany, and his cousin got the notice that the glass factory is going to be taken over by the Nazis. And he didn't want this to happen. He called up my dad and said, come in with a few others, we're going to destroy this factory and you can take all the glass. And I brought along a plate, if you can see it. This is the type of glass that was in the factory, not precious glass, just good ordinary glass. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, we didn't have computers. They didn't know what my father looked like. They didn't have cell phones, but he was a fugitive. He had to hide because after Kristallnacht, they were picking up Jews, even if they weren't fugitives. Just because they were Jewish, they were sending them to concentration camp. And in order to help him, we were still in the apartment, And after I came back from the burning synagogue, I went into the apartment. My dad wasn't there, but about an hour later, they came looking for him. 2 Nazis came looking for him. Where is your father? We really didn't know. We didn't know about anti-Semitism. We didn't know whether my temple was burning. And we didn't know. So they beat up my brother, and I objected to that. And we had a governess, and they really hurt him badly. They pushed me against the wall, and they said, this will just be an example. If you don't tell us where your father is, we will be back tomorrow and you will tell us. Now I'm going to cut it very short. We all decided to go into hiding. My mother, who wasn't threatened, my father, we don't even know where he was. He could have been with his Gentile friends or in the forest or wherever. Anyway, I went into hiding. I had a governess. She helped me a great deal. And I stayed in hiding from November 1938 until September 1939, when we escaped and got into Holland. And now I will tell you a brief story, which I usually tell my students when I speak to them, to introduce them about what happened during the Holocaust. And this appeared in the Sun Sentinel. The Sun Sentinel gave it a heading, High Price of Freedom, Dental Work. Long before Kristallnacht, my father made plans to get out of Europe. He saw the war clouds approaching and anti-Semitism spreading all around us. He applied to be included in the quota to get into the United States, an immigration quota. And he hired a tutor to teach my brother and me English. The anxiety in our household increased in November 1938 when synagogues in Germany were burned to the ground. Jewish businesses were destroyed, and the Nazis started to take Jewish men to concentration camps. We all breathed a sigh of relief when we were informed that we made the quota, our papers were in order, and visas in hand. We sailed on the last boat out of Rotterdam before Holland fell to the Nazis. Out of the 100 or more relatives we left behind, only about 2 cousins survived Auschwitz, and 6 survived by hiding in the underground. On the ship crossing to the United States, I befriended another teenager who told me her family almost didn't make it, they didn't pass the physical at the American Council. They were told that the tooth had to be filled. She had a cavity. And without having the tooth filled, you can't get papers to get to the United States. Well, Jewish dentists weren't permitted to practice, and Gentile dentists weren't allowed to see Jewish patients. So for a large fee, they found a dentist through the black market who took care of the problem. I wondered how many of our people had physical or mental problems. And years later, I visited the Statue of Liberty and read the inscription, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free." And I added, with my name, I added, "Provided you don't have a cavity." This was the situation with the American Council all over Europe. The administration, the Roosevelt administration, who was in charge, gave orders to all the councils, look for anything. If you walked in with a cane, you did not get papers to come to the United States. If you wore glasses, if you had a physical or even any kind of a mental problem, you were denied a visa. So people escaped places like Shanghai, Uruguay, Caribbean countries. So many countries took these people in and helped them, because if not, they would have gone into a ghetto or into a concentration camp. It reminded me, now that we're living through this virus, I belong to a senior center in Delray Beach, and we have many Holocaust survivors. And a neighbor next to the center they give in unsold bread at the end of the day. They give it to the center. It can go to the people that work there, the aides, the janitors, anybody who wants to can pick up. This isn't a day old. It's just unsold bread. And there were some people that grab it. They just go, they want that bread. There was one woman in a wheelchair. She couldn't get it. So I gave it to her. It was like giving her back her memory when she was in a ghetto or concentration camp. They lived on one slice of bread for the day. So you can imagine what a loaf of bread meant to her. If you will have meals with any survivor, you will see they never finish their meal. It has to last another day. And this is what we have to try and tell the children in our schools, what these children and the children, teenagers, old people, what they went through. One piece of bread for the day, and sometimes less. And I would just want to make it brief to have time for the next person. As a survivor, I feel the need to discuss the Holocaust in order to strengthen your need to discuss it with your children and grandchildren. In the years following the Holocaust, a small group of activists among the survivors demanded that the world remember the catastrophe that befell mankind, and especially the Jewish people. Most of the time, the stories of pain, grief, and unimaginable evil were met with silence. Perhaps people didn't know how to respond. Maybe they felt ashamed that nothing had been done to help these people and these victims. Maybe they didn't have believed the chilling stories and the horrible photos. They could not believe that man can be so inhuman and so barbaric. Or maybe it's because it happened to Jewish people. They would shut their eyes when they were being murdered, and after the war, they did not want to be reminded of the consequences of the failure to act against the German Nazi murderers and their collaborators. Abandoned during the war, we were ignored after the war, and as survivors, we again felt alone and without help, but we persisted. We were driven to tell our stories and to motivate others to learn and to remember. This drive in us to commemorate and send this message to children in schools, in colleges, and all over, and to have others remember what happened, motivated us to write about the Holocaust in our book. So you can tell your grandchildren and those that follow them what you know and what you remember. If not for the survivors, there would be no Yom HaShoah like today, where we're celebrating Yom HaShoah. There would be no Yom HaShoah commemoration. There would not be a Holocaust museum in Washington. For the survivors, the process of telling and retelling is never over. Remembering the Holocaust is always a work in progress, for we well understand that the minute people start saying, it's enough already, we have enough testimonies, we have too many remembrance activities, that is the time to worry that people are beginning to forget. Because of the level of ignorance, some deniers may be able on television, talk shows, in college newspapers, and other medium to plant a seed of doubt about what happened during the Holocaust, talking about a seed of doubt. The people that work for the survivors, the claims conference in New York, have a seed of doubt. They don't believe that the Holocaust happened before 1938. The Holocaust started in 1933 when Hitler came to power, and they deny people that were in hiding, children, when they came out of the ghettos and everything, they had nobody to speak for them. The adults got hired lawyers and everything. These were innocent children. They had nobody to speak for them. And the people at the claims conference in New York are not speaking for the children that were in hiding. So they plant a seed of doubt. what happened during the Holocaust? The real danger posed by the deniers is not today, next week, or next year, but 10 or 20 years from now, when there are no more eyewitnesses. So you must guard the truth and remember not to forget. Otherwise, your heirs will forget to remember. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing so much.
You're so welcome.
If anybody has a question, if you could please type it into the chat on the bottom. I see that Bernie has his hand up. We're not going to open it up to questions.
I'm just getting some water.
That's fine. We would like to have everything typed into the chat. I don't have any questions yet.
Okay.
So I'm going to, we'll come back to questions for you, Helen.
Okay.
As they're typed after possibly Ralph finishes speaking, because I don't want to open it up. I do have that you were amazing and a wonderful speaker from a comment from one of the people. But anybody that has questions, please type it into the chat. You can just run your mouse over the Zoom screen. You'll see chat at the bottom. Just type them to me and I'll read them. I'm going to now turn it back to Rabbi Barry to introduce our next Holocaust survivor, Ralph Mollerick. And thank you so, so much.
Thank you very much, Helen. And thank you, Sharon, for organizing this, and Sheila Finkelstein, who's the brains behind the operation. Thank you so much for volunteering your efforts. We're going to now turn it over to Ralph. I just want to make sure, Sharon, that you're putting him on the screen, because I didn't see Helen on my screen. Hopefully she was. So I want to make sure Ralph is on the screen. And I'm going to turn this over now to Ralph for him to share some thoughts with us as well. So Ralph Mollerick, we thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story, not only with us, but through the years. We really appreciate what you're doing.
Ralph, before you speak, 1 second. If you want the speaker to be on your screen, in the upper right corner, you'll see a box, a square box that's got 3 dots on it. If that's what you see, click on that and you'll have speaker view. If not, you'll have 9 little squares and you've already got the speaker. Okay, I'm sorry, Ralph, I had to.
Thank you for inviting me as part of the Holocaust Remembrance Day. My name is Ralph Mollerick. I'm from Wolfhagen, Germany, a small town near the city of Kassel. We were a middle upper class family, with my father owning a hardware lumber business. Life was good until Hitler came to power. Everything changed for the Jews. I would like to talk about 3 snippets of my life as a Holocaust survivor. The first one, perhaps the most dramatic, is the event that led to the Kindertransport Rescue Mission and was rapidly coordinated between the Jewish Community Council in Germany and the British Parliament. The guidelines limited the transport to England with predominantly Jewish children ages 17 and under, unescorted and without limit in number. My event started with the pogrom described as Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, implemented by the Nazis all across Germany on November the 9th through the 10th, 1938, and inflicted on the Jews. The Nazis smashed store windows owned by Jewish merchants and looted merchandise from the shops. Synagogues were broken into, and prayer books and Torahs were all thrown into piles in the streets and set on fire. The fire engines were standing by, making certain that local homes and buildings were safe from the flames. There were moments we stood in horror, unable to believe this was happening to us. Merchants rushing to their shops to prevent further damage were shot. Jews were taken from homes and arrested. While there are many arrests of Jews and dissidents prior to this event, this was the beginning of family fear and extraordinary concern for safety of their children. Needless to say, I was scared and no longer allowed by my parents to leave the house. Next day, we smelled acrid smoke and discovered burning of our synagogue and smoldering of the books. Countless Jewish communities in shock wondered what action could be taken for saving their children. When the kinder transport was set in place and agreed upon, it was announced on radio. Hearing the news, Jewish families stood on long lines to procure tickets for children's exodus. My father stood in the falling snow to acquire the necessary documents for us, knowing priorities were set on first come, first serve. The first kinder transport left Berlin on December the 1st, 1938, for Holland and by ferry the next day to Harwich, England. We were given 2 days' notice that our transport was leaving December the 14th, 1938. We were each allowed one small suitcase for our belongings. I recall very vividly at the main Hamburg train station where hundreds of people had gathered with their children. There was a cacophony of sounds in the large waiting area of the station. Some singing, others screaming or praying, an instrument playing here and there, families giving last bits of instruction to children as we waited for the time to depart. We stood together, embracing and listening to last words. My mother kissed my sister and told her to take care of your little brother. My father lovingly hugged me and said to get an education, as that is one thing no one can take away from you. The time for departing to the lower level train tracks was announced with a high shrill of a whistle and over the speaker announcing that children are to form one line of twos at platform 14A. We gave our parents one final kiss and departed for the trains. We never saw our parents again. How could I ever forget that scene? The second snippet is life in Orthodox boys' hostels. The following day, the ferry arrived at Harwich, England, where we were bused to Dovercourt summer camp. The bunk dwellings were accommodated without heating or hot water for that time of year. It was the coldest day in a country where English is spoken and good manners enforced. In the morning, the administrator informed us how the orderly processing will be done. We were instructed to learn the language and customs of the land. No one will leave the camp until these skills have been acquired. My sister Edith had some knowledge of English and grilled me each day until I met the requirements in both language and customs. In 3 weeks, we were given instructions to the next phase of our journey. Some of the children had prearranged engagements in meeting family members or friends to live with. My sister had a girlfriend in London who was studying to become a nurse, as my sister also. I was quickly informed that I would not be going with my sister. First, I experienced leaving my parents in Germany, and now I had to leave my sister in England. The traumatic experience felt devastating. Arrangements were made for me to go to an Orthodox boys' hostel in Clapton, London. The journey by bus to the hostel was quick, but I was not prepared for the orientation. I learned that I would be living among 40 boys, ranging in age from 11 to 20. I was the youngest at 8 years old. The davening each day seemed excessive, not to mention prayers following meals and Hebrew classes. Living with older boys became challenging, and at times experienced being bullied. Some engaged in hitting me. This was when I defended myself and notified the rabbi that I can no longer withstand life another day in the hostel. There were 2 other times when I was placed in hostels, but each with better experiences and with happier personal results. I learned that I had to approach education with more vigor and to seriously address what I wanted to become. Several older boys encouraged me to read as much as I could find in the library, and doubling up in learning to make up for the lack of knowing the language. I completed school at age 15 and encouraged by my sister to find work. My interests were towards engineering and found an engineering firm producing machine general parts for industry. One evening, after working hours, I decided to stay to automate an assembly line for machine parts. In 1 hour, I fabricated what looked like weeks of work with the parts, then restoring the assembly back to its original configuration, and went home. Arriving at the shop in the morning, the supervisor inquired if I knew something about the parts in the storage bin. Responding to the affirmative, I was severely admonished for violating plant safety policies. Later, I was called into the president's office, where I was subjected to further questions on my performance. I felt scared and expected the worst. Actually, he admired my ability in setting up the assembly line for improving production. He offered to enroll me at the Birmingham Polytechnic Institute in an engineering curriculum. All went well for 1 year, and then my sister and I received a visa to come to America. I did not want to leave and resisted, but I lost that argument. The third and final snippet occurred in Washington Heights, New York, where we settled. My sister insisted that I go back to high school. We went to a pre-engineering high school in downtown Manhattan and saw the dean for advice. My scholastic records from England were destroyed in the bombings. My sister insisted that 4 years in high school would be good for me. Following what I had been through in England, I was crushed at the thought. It all worked out very well, and felt great satisfaction that I followed my father's loving words. Of course, I went on to college and earned a degree in mechanical engineering, spending most of my career working for NASA. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Your story was very moving and very emotional for all of us to hear. Thank you for sharing. And thank you, Helen, for also sharing. I have some comments that people made, not really necessarily questions. but I do want to share these with you, both you and Helen. This is from Alice. I won't say her last name just in case she doesn't want. Thank you for your powerful talk. Tonight, our grandson, who is graduating from the University of Massachusetts in May, just sent us and his family a message showing the defamation of the Hillel there. He did mention that today is Yom HaShoah. He's 22 years old and knows about the Holocaust. He will not forget. Another comment directed to Ralph is moved by your father's last words to you, Ralph. Get an education. That's the one thing that can't be taken away from you. Very moving story. I do have a question for Helen, so I'm going to unmute Helen as well. Helen, how do the youth of today react when you speak with them? Do you find that they have no knowledge of what actually happened?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes, I totally agree with you. Many of the students have never, I shouldn't say many, there are some students that don't know anything about the Holocaust. You really have to start very, very slowly. However, I must congratulate the teachers and the students in Port St. Lucie. There's a school there where a teacher has already gone to Poland, has made the March of the Living. She has the whole history of the Holocaust and what has happened. And the students are so well informed that they have a room of pictures of the different Holocaust survivors that they have spoken to. And they in turn teach other teachers. This particular teacher in Port St. Lucie goes around teaching about the Holocaust. So they, in that particular area where Jews are the minority, the students are the majority that know about it. I had one student come here with a parent, and they wanted to be educated, and then you have to go very, very slowly. Many times I give them a book to read about it. They don't know what happened in the ghettos. They cannot believe. You cannot start with extermination. You cannot tell them that they were murdered, that they played football with babies. Their babies were the football, and they smashed their heads against the wall. You have to start gradually. And this mentality is born into the Germans at very, very young age. They were trained to hate the Jews from infancy, from the beginning. That's all they could talk about is hate. They don't know why. But when it came to the concentration camps, there weren't just Jews, there were the gypsies, there were people that were not believers, and many of them were the, I would call them, they were bisexuals. They were killed just like that. Invalids, mentally ill, or schizophrenics. They were all, anybody who wasn't a mental institute. It wasn't just Jews. They just wanted a clean, pure, blonde, blue-eyed Germany, and everybody else was murdered. So yes, I do talk to the children, and they appreciate what you tell them. They do study it, and they, especially now that they have advanced, and this is what my fear is. After us, who's going to talk about it? But the students will absorb it, and they'll go back and tell their parents. And some of the children never heard the word Holocaust. So you have to start very, very gradually and build it up, and then they can appreciate it. Yes.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen, for answering the question. Thank you, Helen and Ralph, for your words. I know it's not easy to tell your story, especially not seeing an audience in front of you. It makes it even more difficult. I know your stories bring up a lot in your emotions, and we appreciate that you're sharing with us. And and bringing this to all of our generations, everyone that's on this call and everyone that's going to watch the recording after it's posted. We really,
and I just
really
want to tell you, I appreciate what you're doing.
thank you, Helen. I appreciate that.
Sharon,
and
before
thank
you show the movie, I also want to thank both of our guests and just let people know that today, many people feel themselves inconvenienced. They feel like their life has been torn asunder. They're not able to get out of their house. They don't have access to food like they used to. They don't have freedom of movement. They're bored. And this is nothing. This just gives us some sense of how we get used to living in a certain way, and to try to understand what the two people who are with us, Helen and Ralph, went through, and the people who lived through a concentration camp. It was just so horrific that what we're experiencing now is nothing compared to what they went through. And so it gives us a little taste of the complete disruption of life that took place, and the complete misery that they went through. So we're now going to have a movie, a video, because this is Yom HaShoah HaGivurah, the day of the Holocaust and of heroism. And we're going to see a little bit of that heroism now. And then I would like to sum up by sharing a few words and lessons that we learned from the Holocaust and from our speakers.
So it was starvation in the ghetto. People were hungry, constantly hungry. Prices of food were very high. And it was no occupation really from what to make a living.
As the ghetto population peaks at 450,000, living conditions become unbearable. The streets are full of starving children, and the diseases of poverty are rampant, first typhus and then tuberculosis.
About 1/3 of the ghetto's inhabitants were living in subhuman conditions, in cellars and old schools and abandoned cinemas and synagogues and so on. There was no food for them, and they were slowly dying.
At Treblinka, only 80 kilometers northeast of Warsaw, the gas chambers are designed to kill 6,000 people a day. The camp receives its first victims in early July 1942. Just 2 weeks later, the Nazis informed the head of the Warsaw Judenrat, Adam Cherniakow, that most of the Jews of the ghetto will be deported to the east at the rate of 6,000 people a day. During the first week of the deportations, Jewish policemen, acting under German orders, evacuate the streets of the ghetto, picking up homeless beggars and children, the destitute, the elderly, the sick, and the unemployed. Baruch Spiegel was a youth activist in the Bund.
We knew already that taking them to Treblinka, there are gas chambers, and they were gassed. Some people didn't believe it. It's impossible.
But there are people in the ghetto who favor armed resistance, the members of the underground youth movements. These include Zionist groups who before the war prepared Jewish teenagers for emigration to Palestine. In March 1942, at a secret conference, one of the Zionist youth leaders, Yitzhak Zuckerman, calls for the immediate formation of a Jewish fighting organization.
לא היה נשק. There were no weapons. We had a pistol that didn't work. One of the fighters tried stabbing a pillow with a knife to see if he could stab a person. We were not used to thinking about killing, about shooting someone with a weapon.
The Jewish youth movements order their members to avoid deportation at all costs and to attempt escape from the trains if they are captured. Aharon Karmi is 20 years old when he breaks out of a train carrying him and his family to Treblinka.
And then my father told us, go and jump off the train. In the end, he said, if one of you will succeed in jumping from the train and remain alive, perhaps you will avenge our deaths.
The Jewish resistance fighters announce their presence by setting fire to German-owned businesses in the ghetto. The fighters also distribute leaflets, warning Jews that deportation means death and urging them to resist in any way possible.
My function was to go after curfew and paste the posters calling the Jews to armed rebellion. There were patrols, but it was dark. And we knew the streets, and we were going through the valleys, through the backyards, risking our lives, but we were young, and one was going with a bucket and the brush to paste the wall, and the other one was running with the roll of posters and clipping them. We were too young, I think, to realize how dangerous it really was. The order of the day from HaShomer was that we are not going to be taken alive. We are not going to be allowed to take on the transports. There was just a conviction, we are just not going.
By the fall of 1942, the Warsaw Ghetto is a desolate place, emptied of most of its people. Jewish leaders now believe it is just a matter of time before the Nazis will return to deport the remaining population. All the youth movements, including the Socialist Bund, now commit themselves to armed resistance. By January 1943, the Jewish fighting organization grows to 500 members, with a command staff headed by two Zionist youth leaders, Mordecai Anielewicz and Yitzhak Zuckerman, and with a small cache of 30 handguns. There's also a second resistance group of 200 Zionist youth, the ZZW, or the Jewish Fighting Union. The Jewish Fighting Organization issues a manifesto urging all the Jews of the ghetto to resist any further deportations and to be ready, the manifesto says, to die as human beings.
Just this, just the will to fight, just to show them they want us so humiliate that we are not human beings at all.
The Germans decide to make their final assault on the ghetto on the eve of Passover, Monday, April 19th, 1943. They mobilize almost 2,000 soldiers and 36 officers.
And on the first Seder, on April 19th, 1943, we get a note calls from the other side. The Germans are surrounding the ghetto. A platoon of German soldiers came through the Muranowska Street into the ghetto and went to the Muranowska Square, singing, happy. Now, when they came on the Muranowska Street, there were two buildings there with flags. One Jewish flag with the Magen David, and one Polish flag. The boys, the Jewish boys, knew that every bullet has to kill. Otherwise, they won't come out. So when they stopped singing and standing there on the Muranowska Square, they came under fire. And it was hell for them, because so many fell. They threw their guns and they ran away.
There are only 700 Jewish fighters, many of them teenagers. They're armed with pistols, grenades, Molotov cocktails, with a few rifles and one machine gun.
We knew we had to stand up to the regular German army, which had conquered almost all of Europe. We knew that we could not engage in a conflict on a similar scale. We had two aims, vengeance and the redemption of the honor of the Jewish people, that we would not go like sheep to the slaughter, that there would be resistance.
At 6 a.m., German units, still under the command of Colonel von Sammern, place artillery around the ghetto and enter the gates supported by a few armored vehicles. They find only deserted streets. Jewish resistance fighters are hiding high above them, watching from the windows of abandoned apartments. At the corner of Mila and Zamenhof, they wait until the Germans are right below, and then let loose with a barrage of homemade grenades, gasoline bombs, and pistol fire.
So it's unbelievable. I don't believe it. That's our young boys, young men without military background, without education in tactics. Don't forget, you're asking me what did the tactics? Nothing. Not one of the leaders had a military background.
On the second day of the uprising, the major fighting does not begin until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. When the Germans enter a small square, the Jewish defenders detonate a mine hidden under the intersection, which kills and injures a large number of German soldiers. Aharon Karmi remembers that day, the day of Hitler's birthday, as a joyous one for the Jewish resistance.
Then, in that moment, when I shot at the Germans and saw them falling, then I said, this is the revenge that my father wanted. This is the moment.
By the fourth day, the Germans begin to burn down the ghetto, block by block.
The whole city was in flame, because the whole city was burning. So many blocks, not one, so many blocks. Most of them took their children to the carousel, which was with music, which was around that. You could see with the naked eye what was going on in the ghetto, the flames and the burning, everything. And you were just listening to the expressions, Jews are burning. I was in that environment of the people. Until today I cannot understand where did I take the strength not to scream, not to reveal who I am. That I look at my people burning and I cannot say anything. And here the carousel is running, the people are on the carousel with the parents happy.
I will never forget the picture. We went out into the ghetto at night and we passed through raging flames. I don't know how we passed through, how we did it. I have no idea. I can only tell you that the asphalt was melting under our feet. Window panes were exploding. Everything was flowing like water. It was hell on earth.
The situation at Mila 18 becomes desperate. Nearly all the food is gone, the air is bad, heat unbearable, and the fighters have almost no ammunition left. Resistance commander Mordecai Anielewicz orders 20 more fighters to try to escape from the ghetto. Many of them do not want to leave their comrades, even if it means death.
I told him I'm not leaving. He said to me, "No, you are going. There are 10 others in the group and you are going with them. You will go to Yitzhak Zuckerman and tell him what is happening here, that he should send help quickly so we can get out to the forest or somewhere else. Maybe he can send weapons." That's what I had to tell him. The situation is very bad and we need help.
But help never comes. On May 7th, the Germans discover the location of the bunker at number 18 Mila Street. The next morning at 10 a.m. they return. It takes 2 hours to break into the bunker. The fighting is fierce, and the Germans use poison gas to try to drive the fighters out. Most of the 120 Jewish resistance fighters, including their commander, Mordecai Anilevich, decide it is better to die at their own hands than become prisoners of the Nazis. With their remaining bullets, one by one, they shoot themselves. At the very last moment, as the Germans break in, 15 fighters find a previously undiscovered passageway leading outside and get away undetected. But most of the fighters perish. The final testament of Mordecai Anilevich is a letter sent earlier in the uprising to his deputy, Yitzhak Zuckerman. Anilevich wrote, "Peace go with you, my friend. Perhaps we shall meet again. The main thing is the dream of my life has come true. Self-defense in the ghetto and Jewish armed resistance have become a reality. I have lived to see the magnificent heroism of Jewish fighters in battle." But the Warsaw Ghetto uprising was just part of the fabric of Jewish resistance.
We know today of 63 places where there were resistance groups. We know of roughly 20,000 Jews who fought in the forests. So this is not an isolated case, you see. Wherever they had the opportunity, and in some places where they didn't have the opportunity, they fought.
With honor and die with honor. It was their message to us all. They gave their lives for our freedom. Through pain and agony, fought for humanity. We'll keep their memory.
I want to thank you for showing that video, and I want to thank everyone who's still on with us for staying here to hear that story. I was told that we shouldn't show the film because people have a short attention span, that on Zoom or on internet, they're not going to be interested. And I'm glad to see that people are interested, and we will tell this story. This story describes heroism, hagevurah. We see two different types of heroism, but they're both really the same. We see Helen Daniel and Ralph Mollerick, who went through the most indescribable tragedy and horror, having their childhood disrupted and their life turned upside down. And instead of bringing out the beast in them, it brought out the best in them. And instead of making them bitter, it made them better. And they are here today to tell a story of survival and of heroism. Yes, heroism, to be able to go through that experience and come out intact, and to be able to be a source of peace and love for people. We also heard quite a bit about Kristallnacht, how the synagogues were destroyed, the businesses were shattered, the glass was shattered, people were taken out and shot and beaten. This was a test case. You know, now we're talking about testing the coronavirus. How do we do a test? This was a test of the virus of hate. It was a test to see how the world would react and respond. And the world failed the test. They were infected with the virus of indifference. And so they failed to do anything at all. The people of Europe, even the United States, did nothing. And so Hitler realized that he could take Jewish lives and commit the most obscene atrocities, and he would be able to get away with it. And that was the beginning of the end. Because once he saw that there was no reaction, he realized that anything goes. Imagine what would have happened if the world reacted in horror and people denounced him and were willing to fight against him. The whole story would have been different. And that's why we hear from scholar and leader and freedom fighters and rabbis and Elie Wiesel and others who said that all it takes for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. And that's what happened here. And that's why the lesson of the Holocaust also is that we must do something and we must respond. Remember, there was a person in the video who said that he had escaped and he was on the other side and he was with a carousel and non-Jews were hearing what was going on and seeing people being burned alive, and they were just carrying on and having a good time. This was the reason why the Holocaust could happen, because they were infected with the virus of intolerance and indifference. And we see today that many people have the same type of attitude. Never again is a worthless or a meaningless slogan if we don't learn from the past. And what we've learned from the past is that we must speak up and we must take action. Today, for instance, we see a threatened Holocaust of the planet where our forests are burning. The planet is burning up. The potential harm and catastrophe is beyond our ability to comprehend. But like in the Holocaust, many people just went on business as usual and didn't want to confront the threat or minimize it or said it was a hoax. Today, we realize that we need to speak up. Same thing with the coronavirus. If we acted in time, as they did in other countries, the damage would be far less. And so we realize that we must speak up. In addition to the heroes that we see there in the Warsaw Ghetto, and by the way, they won that fight. They won that battle. Many people say, oh, they lost the battle. The Germans won. No, they didn't. They won the battle. They won the battle for self-respect, for courage. Their life lives on. Their courage lives on. Their dignity and their honor inspires people today. The people that invaded, the people that tried to destroy them, they're consigned to the dustbin of history. They have no future. They did not win at all. But the people of the Warsaw Ghetto and everybody who stands up and fights for freedom is someone who's victorious. And we remember the words of Heschel. He said that there are times when we cannot prevent injustice, but there should never be a time when we don't object and oppose it. And so we congratulate and give honor and respect, gevurah, to those who stood up to hate, even though they might not have physically survived. We also remember the lesson of Tuvia Bielski, who took partisans into the woods and fought against the Nazis and defended himself and many others and saved many lives. And he said, freedom begins with a single act of defiance. And so sometimes when authority is abusive, we must be defiant. That really is the lesson of the Jewish people. And the crime of the Holocaust is compounded if we are silent. The crimes of the Holocaust are compounded if we don't learn our lesson. And it's actually a form of Holocaust denial. Even if we admit that the Holocaust happened, if we learn nothing and are silent, it's a type of Holocaust denial. And I, as a rabbi, will always speak out and not just talk about the horror of the Holocaust, but also the cause. Like with the coronavirus, we not only want to talk about how it's affected people, but why is it there? How did it get there? How does it spread? We see the same thing with the intolerance of the Nazis. There were symptomless carriers, people who went along with a bad system and didn't object, and they allowed it to spread. As Heschel said, indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. That we are symptomless carriers if we don't speak up and if we don't denounce evil, and if we just go along. And so many of us, we might not be actually victims who are showing symptoms, but we're all part of the problem, unless we are spiritual first responders who are going to respond to evil and defy evil and speak up against evil. That is the lesson that we should be learning from the Holocaust, and also the cause of the Holocaust. People say, well, they just didn't like Jewish people. This did not arise in a vacuum. If you speak to Christian scholars, they will tell you that from the very beginning, the basic roots of Christianity, it was built on a concept that God had chosen the Jewish people, but the Jewish people blew it. They rejected Jesus, and therefore God turned his back on them and was going to send them into the pit of hell. And therefore, to act in a godlike manner, they had to imitate that behavior. And they had to punish the Jews for rejecting Jesus. And so they did that for 2,000 years until it culminated in the Holocaust. We've even had people who went to Germany after the Holocaust was over, who were speaking out, and they were still accused again of saying, why did you kill Jesus? This is a lie. And it's a disgrace to the honor and the memory of people who died because of a lie, not just in the Holocaust, but for 2,000 years. If we do not correct the record as Jews and say that that is a lie, that Jesus, if he did live, was Jewish, and the Messiah for the Christians was Jewish, and he led a Jewish life, and he died a proud Jew. And it's a form of identity theft to try to take that away from him and act as if there's something that the Jewish people killed Jesus. Jesus was Jewish. It was non-Jews who killed Jesus. Jesus was a proud martyr of the Jewish people, if half of what he said, what was said about him is true. And therefore we need to speak that truth. And there are many Christians who don't believe in Christian scripture literally, unlike Mel Gibson, who's showing that movie Passion of the Christ, training a new generation of Christians to hate Jews. We must stand up against that and say and denounce that movie and denounce these teachings and denounce the teachings of any scripture, including our own, that teaches that one group is loved by God and the other are not. These are the lessons of the Holocaust. Religion must be used to build bridges of understanding, not walls of separation. And so we're here today in order to not just remember the past, but to learn from the past so that we can try to protect ourselves from these types of evils in the future. As Santayana said, those who do not learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. And so I want to thank our guests again. I want to thank Helen Daniel, Ralph Mollerick, for having the courage and the beauty in their soul to come forward and to speak up and to speak their truths. And I want to thank everyone who stayed this long. And remember, never be silent, always stand up, always speak up, and never allow evil to pass by on our watch without speaking out. It's the Jewish thing to do, and it's the human thing to do. We're now going to finish with a video of the lighting of a candle, which I believe is 1.5 minutes. And again, I thank Sharon Leibovitz, Sheila Finkelstein, Helen Daniel, and Ralph Mollerick for putting this together. And I thank all of you for watching, and let us keep this message and the heroism of the Jewish people alive.
Kinderloch, de Jetaye.
We will continue to remember the Holocaust at our Shabbat celebration this Friday. You're all welcome to join us. You can watch that on video on the website of Congregation Va-Dor, as well as our other programming that we have in which we promote a rational approach to Judaism and a social action, interfaith effort to try to make this world a better place through religion. Remember, and let us never forget.